this talk will change your life, except that it probably won't. And it probably won't shock or amaze you either, or restore your faith in humanity. But hopefully what it will do is to try and shed some light as to why so many people make this claim. This sort of very outrageous claim that this will change your life. And perhaps more importantly, why is it that so many millions of people buy into this notion that the answers to their problems are found externally through other people's recommendations, advice, suggestions, magic formulas, rather than trust their own judgment? Now, how common is this claim? Well, a quick Google search will show us, without any particular word or article in there, this will change your life. We have about 173 million hits of these kinds of promises to progress you towards your potential with various content in these websites. And that content ranges anywhere from blogs, articles, buses, bread, anything you can think of, everything and anything. And of course, I love fruits, so I thought, could I get on the sort of treadmill of transformation with a fruit? Can a fruit do that to me? And as luck would have it, I found about close to 54 million websites that promises to transform my life. Apparently, the mangosteen is one of the most popular options or choices. And as delicious of a fruit the mangosteen is, I doubt that it's going to change my life, right? This is definitely one of my favorites. And after you read Dr. Seuss's quotes, that's it, you're done, right? You don't need to look any further. You've got all of life's answers. But I think, a good starting point is that we need to look at why do people make these promises, as untrue and as outrageous as they are. Is it for fame, for fortune, for recognition? Is it because that they want to, or they could be absolutely genuinely in the pursuit of an altruistic act of making a positive impact on other people's lives. But we don't have access to why people do what they do, and we don't have access to their internal drivers or intentions or motivators. So let's shift our attention rather to why is it that many of us fall victim to these claims? Why is it that we get so dragged in or gravitate to this transformational treadmill, sometimes without proper thought or consideration? And that we do, because there definitely is a demand for it, or else there wouldn't be this incredible supply of individuals, both amateurs as well as experts, who claim that they have the answers to the better version of who we are. And at this point, you might be thinking, yeah, but everyone knows that these claims, this stuff isn't actually going to change my life, right? Logically, perhaps, but we don't always operate on a logical field, nor do we always think or behave rationally. But what we are is that we are pleasure-seeking and pain-aversive. And so what happens is just by the mere exposure to such a title, we're drawn in, we're captivated, and the brain gives us a hit of dopamine. And then we get that sort of rush of pleasure, of excitement, of experiencing the possibility, even if it's a possibility of that fantasy. And what happens is a part of our consciousness registers this promise as an expectation. And we hope to fulfill that expectation, right? We start looking forward to the fact that maybe there's somewhere, somehow, in some way, we will be able to fulfill that dream. But unfortunately, in most cases, it ends up in disappointment. And many people end up on the cycle of fantasies and feelings of failure, and they're constantly after that next rush of dopamine to be able to achieve or arrive at that expectation. So let's talk about some of the root causes or reasons as to why we fall victim to seeking external answers rather than trusting our own judgment. Well, the first reason is because of our brain's prehistoric flaws. And what this means is that Mother Nature had a plan. Mother Nature's plan was to make sure that we all survive, right? And in order for you to survive, for us to make sure that, we stay alive, especially in the environments that we lived in thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, there was danger always looming around the corner. And so she evolved a brain that did 3 things routinely. We underestimate our capabilities and our skills. We underestimate opportunities. And we overestimate danger and risk. And so throughout our days, throughout our lives, we've got these flaws that hold us back. And if we don't confront these flaws, and if we're not aware of these negativity biases, what happens is that we think that we're not capable internally to arrive at solutions. So what we do is we think our internal world is holding us back, so perhaps I need to look out externally for particular solutions. The next reason why this happens is because we are obsessed with seeking and receiving the approval of others. And thanks to evolution again, we're wired to crave inclusion. As Aristotle said many moons ago, human beings, we're social animals. And anyone who claims otherwise is either a beast or a deity. And so that sense of belonging, when we get recognition or approval from others, it hits that need for a sense of belonging. Now, from a developmental perspective, human beings are the species that are most dependent on their care providers for their developmental process. We depend on others to be cleaned, to be fed, to be sheltered, and to get approval. See, if you think about it, for example, a baby giraffe, within hours, sometimes days, it's able to walk by itself. At which point do humans become completely independent? 18? 12? 25? At what age? Perhaps never, right? And so as we go through life and we grow up, through our socialization process and enculturation process, we learn how to become independent. We learn how to feed ourselves, to cleanse ourselves, to shelter, and to protect ourselves. But the one attribute or characteristics that isn't directly or exclusively taught or developed in us is our ability to self-examine and self-affirm. And so we go through life expecting the next clap, nod, smile, pat on the back, positive reinforcement to make sure that we're doing the right thing at the right time. In my 20-year career in learning and development in the space of psychology, as a lecturer, as a consultant, coach, and now dean of a business school, I feel absolutely privileged to have been part of hundreds of people's transformational journey. And I tell you, the question that I'm asked most often throughout this, if you had to ask me, what was the one question that is always asked, and that is, what do you think I should do, Dr. Shaheem? To that question, I try and answer, what do you think you should do? And then maybe we can talk about what I think we should do, right? To flip it around. So as you can imagine, there are so many various ideas, opinions, recommendations throughout life, our family, our friends, the media, all the data that comes at us, and all these various opinions. And if we're not clear about what we think we should do, if we're not able to self-affirm, it can be very difficult to go through life with that mindset. Now, our obsession with external voices can be seen in other dimensions of our life as well. Apparently, the average motorist will travel 1,292 extra miles in the wrong direction just because the sat-nav tells them to do so. And so sometimes we even know where to go. We might know the address of where it is that we're going to, but we prefer the external voice to the internal voice that says, hey, look, I got this, don't worry about it. Okay? And this is an actual news story. A woman follows sat-nav and drives straight into a lake. And the 23-year-old driver is a little bit embarrassed, I say. Yeah, she is a little bit embarrassed. But she ended up in a lake that she could see. She could see the consequence of following an external voice. But what happens to the many metaphoric lakes that we end up in because we have decided to live by somebody else's plan about who we should be or somebody else's design of us? And so when you succumb to being who others think you should be rather than who your core self is, we might too end up drowning because we've ended up in these lakes. The third reason why this happens is limiting beliefs. And limiting beliefs take shape quite early in life, and they become the truths that enslave us. Now, they could come from culture, traditions, family, and so on, our experiences. And these are the sentences or statements that hold us back from life. And I think one of the most beautiful stories I ever heard demonstrates the idea of limiting beliefs in the best way possible. There was a woman who was walking past a herd of majestic, beautiful elephants. And she saw that they were tied up by a piece of rope and a block of wood. And so she couldn't believe that these majestic, beautiful animals were standing in stationary, not moving. How is it? There's no way that that block of wood was heavy enough to hold them back. So she went to the trainer and asked, what's the story between the rope and the block of woods? And the trainer said, well, it's very simple. When the elephants are young enough, when they've just come into the world, they're light enough for this block of wood to hold them back. And they grow through life conditioned and learning that they can only go as far as the length of the rope. And so they never question it. Now, us too, we've got all kinds of ropes that are attached to us. Ropes that, were attached to us when we were told in our 5th grade that we're not good at art, or that we're not very creative, or that you're too old, or you're too young to do anything. So it's very, very important to challenge those limiting beliefs so they don't hold you back, and that so you don't lose your confidence to always depend on external voices. The fourth area that I'd like to talk to you about is what I refer to as comparison chaos. Now, we live in an era in which we are bombarded by other people's edited, contrived, and fantastic, lives. Everyone's having a better time than we are. And we are creatures of comparison, so we compare the comprehensive notion or idea of my life with the edited sort of corner dimension of one particular spot of somebody else's life, and we think that perhaps, gosh, my differences are deficiencies, and I may be inherently flawed because my life isn't as good as theirs. So what happens, the more comparison that takes place, the bigger hit my confidence takes. And so if I'm not feeling confident or if I lack self-esteem, then I'm not likely to listen to the voice within. I'm likely to be drawn and to listen to other people's voices. And finally, we're upgrade obsessed, right? We're part of a generation that upgrades things all the time. We upgrade our laptops, applications, mobiles, and so on. So hey, why not upgrade my life? And if there are 200 million people out there telling me that they've got the answers to how I can transform my life, maybe I should do it, right? If I'm applying the same philosophy to them. So what's the result of this? Self-help or self-hell? And as we're bombarded by these different messages, what happens is that we get more and more disconnected from our internal compass and more dependent on external voices. And the problem with this, perhaps the darkest, most dysfunctional aspect of this, ladies and gentlemen, is that with the wealth of information, the sort of plethora of information that comes at us, it's not consistent. It's contradictory. So you have one author telling you that you need to live in the moment, enjoy the present. Then you have the other author in the same breath saying, what? Live in the moment? No, you've got to plan and prepare. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You need, goals and schedules and so on and so forth. One author tells you that you need to be grateful and practice gratitude for everything that you have. The other author says, challenge yourself. Challenge the process. Don't be happy with the status quo. So there's cognitive chaos trying to navigate through all this information. Who do we follow, right? And it is very difficult to work through all this, especially if you ignore your own voice, values, and vision. So what's the mindset shift here? The first thing we need to do is this. We need to stop relying exclusively on external solutions for our problems. And in doing so, we need to embrace the fact that success, satisfaction, and growth requires that we not only take into account external advice and so on, but that we need to turn it around and look more inward to find solutions. And when you do that, you tap in to a very rich and resourceful inner world that can provide exceptional answers. Why should we do this? Well, because you have the ability to self-assess and to develop. But I'd like to invite you to change your strategy, to try and adopt a new strategy. And I call this strategy waking up, to live a more awake existence, to be more wakeful in how you get on with your day-to-day activities. There are people who live like this, so I'm going to share with you what I've come up with in my observations of individuals who live in this manner. To start with, they're incredibly skilled at paying close attention to what the problem is or the challenge that they're going through. They can completely clear the clutter in their mind and be laser sharp focused as to what is the issue. When you ask these people what's wrong, rarely do they say, I don't know what could be happening. They know exactly what's going on. Next, they allow their mind to wander and wander about their skills and abilities, about their limitations, about what is causing the problems. Is it false assumptions? Is it something against their values? And in wondering about that, they begin to understand what could be contributing to the problem. Next, they don't wait for magical solutions to occur or for the perfect moment to act. They begin action. And when they begin acting, they're able to see and utilize their skills and abilities to try and cope with the situation. Next, they look back at what they have done and they assess in the sort of what has gone right and perhaps what needs to be reevaluated. And it is at this point where these individuals say that, I've got these particular skills and abilities, but perhaps now I need to seek externally for certain resources and solutions to further my cause. You see, people who are awake are not under any false illusions of grandeur, but they know when to tap into their inner rich self and when to use outside to arrive at solutions. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, it is through the repetition of this process and reflection that we learn from our mistakes and we get the necessary inoculations from life that teach us the importance of growth as well as allowing us to evolve. So, the next time you are in a conversation or at a job interview and someone asks you if you were a superhero, what is your superpower? Well, tell them, I don't need to think hypothetically, nor do I need to fantasize about this, because I have the answer. My superpower is self-awareness. And it is with the power of self-awareness that I can make the seemingly impossible possible. What I'm inviting you to do is to be the expert in your life, to realize that growth and satisfaction and fulfillment are not variables that can be bought or borrowed externally. They can be to a certain extent, but if we forget about our inner world, we won't succeed. You need to remember that your differences are not deficiencies and that you are not flawed. You are incredibly unique, you're whole, you're resourceful, and that you should be the architect, engineer of your present and of your future. So let's all endeavor to live not by default, but live a life of deliberate design. Thank you very much.